Thinking about the new iPad mini? You're not alone. In fact, I haven't stopped thinking about this thing since I bought it. Hello and welcome back to Ellis Reviews, and thank you for subscribing if you have, and if you haven't subscribed, yes, the button's down there. I've been waiting for the iPad mini 6 for what felt like ages, and that's principally because it isn't cheap. It starts at £479 or $499, but that only gets you 64 gig of storage. There's no 128 gigabyte option, which means you go straight from 64 gig to 256 gig, and that costs £619 or $649. That's a lot of money for an iPad, and there are compelling alternatives. There's, for example, the iPad Air 4, which I'm a big fan of, and there's also the iPad 9, which I have here as my kind of note thing for this channel. And this is just a brilliant iPad, and how much is it? £319, $329. It's an absolute bargain. However, I've been using this iPad mini 6 daily since I bought it, and I had some pretty lofty expectations of it, particularly given how expensive it is. And in this video, I'm going to try and help you work out if you should buy it. Starting with the size, this is easily the most inconspicuous, simple, easy to live with iPad I've ever owned. The size of it is absolutely perfect in my mind. It slips into any rucksack without you even knowing it's there, and I personally just put it into the zip compartment of my MacBook Pro slipcase, and again, you just don't know it's there. Now yes, the screen is smaller than a regular iPad and an iPad Air, and obviously the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but for content consumption, you know, watching some Netflix, watching YouTube, reading books, reading magazines, I think it's perfect. There's barely any weight to it, it fits comfortably in two hands or just one-handed use. And even light email work, you know, checking emails, typing on the screen occasionally for some quick replies, I don't even mind doing that on this. You can even type on it phone style, so kind of like this with two hands. The only problem with that I found is that if you've got the Apple Pencil attached, it makes it a little bit wider and a bit tricky to do that. So I tend to take the Apple Pencil off and type like this, but it feels very natural doing that. Now, as you can see, I've got the Smart Folio case, which is very nice. It's the official Apple one, and it adds a tiny bit of weight, but this is a very light iPad, so adding this barely makes a difference. And it gives it the protection I need on the back, and I don't know, it kind of completes it really. It's a nice little package like this. Now, the size of this thing won't be for everyone, and that is probably one of the biggest considerations you'll have if you're looking at the iPad mini. I'd recommend going to a store, picking one up and having a play with it and just seeing how you feel about the size, because if you're used to a normal sized iPad, 9.5 inches, 10 inches, or the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, then this will feel a little bit cramped. But for me, it's just the perfect iPad size. It makes the iPad Air feel more like a little laptop, and it makes the 12.9-inch iPad Pro feel comically big. Right, the screen. The 8.5-inch Retina screen is typical iPad, sharp and colourful and lovely. Nothing to worry about there. It looks very nice, plenty bright enough. There is jelly scrolling. There's been lots of stuff about this. I did talk about this in a bit more length on my previous review of this, which I'll link to above. But it doesn't matter. Trust me, it's there 100%, and I think it's quite a widespread issue. I think you'll probably get it on any iPad mini that you buy. Now, for the uninitiated, jelly scrolling is this thing where if you have your iPad in portrait mode like that, and you have a web page or something with a lot of text on it, and you start scrolling up and down like that repeatedly, the text will look like it's waving, and it's as though one half of the screen is a bit slower to respond than the other half. It's very, very slight. Jelly scrolling is a known thing on LCD panels. It's all to do with the refresh rate and which orientation is the kind of natural orientation for the screen. So for example, you don't see jelly scrolling if you have the iPad like this. I've completely forgotten it's there. The only time I do notice it is when I read a comment on my YouTube channel from someone saying, is the jelly scrolling thing an issue? Because it puts it back in my mind, and then the next time I pick this up, I do go looking for it. But it's that classic thing in life where if you fixate on a small problem, it becomes a much bigger issue, and you only notice that issue. Whereas if you use the iPad mini as intended and enjoy whatever it is that you're doing on it, you do not notice jelly scrolling. Trust me. Let's move on. It's also worth mentioning that the iPad mini 6 doesn't have Pro Motion, so it doesn't have the 120Hz variable refresh rate screen of the iPad Pro. I'm not overly surprised by that. Pro Motion is clearly something that Apple is reserving for its Pro devices. It will make its way down to this size device at some stage. It doesn't bother me, really. And again, it's that classic thing where if you've got an iPad with Pro Motion and you use it alongside this, then yes, you're going to notice a difference. It feels a little bit sluggish, and you can see the refreshing a bit more. Again, if you've just got this, then you don't know what you're missing. The only thing I would say about the iPad mini screen, and a few other people have pointed this out, and I don't get it either, is that on the home screen on iPad OS, the icons just don't look like they're being spaced out enough. There's a visible gap on either side of the screen, and it's just another example where iPad OS needs a bit of refinement depending on which device it's running on. There's also a few apps I use that aren't optimized for this size screen. YouTube Studio is quite a good example of that, where it doesn't fill the entire screen and everything looks a bit small. As for performance, it's an iPad. It feels really quick. iPad OS is very fast. I don't game on this thing, so it's not worth asking me how gaming works on it. There are loads of people out there who are covering that in much greater detail than I ever could, but from what I understand, it performs pretty well. No, it hasn't got an M1 chip in it. Doesn't need one. iPads don't need the M1 chip at the moment because iPad OS doesn't do anything with it. So again, performance-wise, I barely ever cover this with iPads because they are just iPads. They're super fast and they remain super fast for an awfully long time. But for everyday use, the screen is fantastic, forget about jelly scrolling, and the performance is typically iPad-like, i.e. brilliant. I bought the iPad mini for one thing, really. Okay, content consumption was quite important, but the main reason I bought this was to pair it with the Apple Pencil 2. And that meant I could finally get rid of my paper notebook and go completely digital. And I have done it. I'll come on to the note-taking thing in a moment, but there is one thing that I've added to this iPad which has made it the perfect note-taking device. And that is something I never thought I would add to an iPad or even an iPhone ever, because I do not like them, and that is a screen protector. But it's not just any old screen protector, it's actually a Paperlike screen protector. Now this video isn't sponsored by Paperlike, I bought it with my own money, and I've actually wanted one for a little while, just to see what all the fuss is about. Now it's worth mentioning that my experience with screen protectors hasn't been that great. I tend to rush putting them on, which leaves loads of bubbles and things on them, and I've never liked what they do to the screen, both in the way that the screen feels afterwards, but also the fact that it dulls the contrast, and it just looks a bit rubbish. Now firstly, the installation process for the Paperlike, I'm happy to report, was incredibly straightforward. I did have to refer to their YouTube channel for the instructions. It does come with instructions obviously, but I'm a bit of an idiot, so I needed something that was more idiot-proof, and the YouTube video worked for that. They send you two as well, which is very nice, but the installation process is really easy. You basically line up the screen protector, attach some guide stickers to one side to keep it in place, you then open it like a book cover, you then use the supplied screen cleaning stuff to give the screen a proper wipe and get rid of all of the dust and stuff, and you then gently close the protector back onto the screen. And from there you get rid of any bubbles that are there, and that's it. Mine looks absolutely perfect. The spacing around it is perfect, there are no bubbles. I've done a really good job of it, and like I say, I'm a bit of an idiot with this sort of stuff, so if I can do it, trust me, you can. But what's it like to write on? So when you first try out the Paperlike with the Apple Pencil 2, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is no different. But then you start gliding your pen a bit further and there's resistance. And it's just enough resistance to make it feel like paper. The one big issue I've always had with note-taking on the iPad with the Apple Pencil is the fact that it just doesn't really feel that natural. But the Paperlike does feel far more paper-like. It's so hard to talk about this without coming out with all these cliches, but that is what it's like. And it even sounds like paper, if you can hear this. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's just got that kind of paper sound. And also, it doesn't tap quite as badly. It taps, obviously, but it's not quite the same as tapping on glass. And that really helps when you're on calls, trust me. Now, it does impact the screen. There's no two ways about it. It does change the contrast of the screen. It's not quite as contrasty. The colors are slightly dulled, and you can sort of see the screen protector. You can kind of see the Paperlike on the screen. But again, a bit like the jelly scrolling thing, you can only see it if you go looking for it. But I don't mind it, and I quite like the fact it gives you this sort of matte finish, which you don't obviously normally get with iPads. It's quite a satisfying thing to run your finger over. And I'm willing to take some of the other trade-offs if, in return, I get something that feels like I'm writing on paper. So the addition of the Paperlike for this has completed the iPad mini 6 as the perfect note-taking device for me. I use it every single day, so when I'm doing calls, if I'm writing notes for these videos, if I'm just scribbling something down that I want to remember, I always go for this now, and that is exactly what I wanted from this iPad mini. I will put a link to Paperlike in the description, like I say, not sponsored, but go and check it out, see what you think, and yeah, it really has made the iPad mini 6 for me. So who is the iPad mini 6 for, and should you buy one? Well, it's, I think, a very strange little iPad. I love it to death, but it sits in this weird place between the 9th generation iPad normal, whatever you want to call it, and the iPad Air 4. And it has a much smaller screen than both those devices, and it isn't cheap. And it's really worth emphasizing that because it doesn't make this an easy purchase. Basically, you've got to really want an iPad mini and have a decent iPad budget to buy one. So my advice with this is if you're worried about the screen size, for example, and you're worried about the jelly scrolling thing, I understand. I mean, it's nothing to worry about, but I get it if you're worried about seeing that. And more importantly, you're worried about the price of this thing. Get the iPad 9th generation. This is, I think, the best iPad that Apple makes, purely because it's so affordable and it's so powerful. And yeah, it's got bigger bezels, it uses Touch ID, although for some people that's a bit of a benefit, but it's just such a good iPad. And at £319, what, 349, whatever it is, dollars, it's pretty good value. The iPad mini 6 pushes the value stakes if you're not sure about it. But if you have a pretty good budget for your next iPad and you're not fussed about the screen size, and like me, you want something that you want to be able to watch things on, occasionally do very light work on, and take notes on, get the iPad mini 6. Like me, you'll be bowled over by it and it will fit perfectly into your life. Equally, if you've got an old iPad mini, which you love, and like me again, you were waiting for a long time to get your hands on a brand new designed version, then it's a no-brainer. So what are you gonna do? Let me know in the comments. Are you gonna buy an iPad mini 6 or are you gonna save a few pennies and get yourself the iPad 9th generation? Now, if you've still got some time, keep watching for a link to my full original review of the iPad mini 6. But until next time, thank you as always for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.